l'immenso piacere di accogliere due ricercatori da una università, l'Università di Tartu, che è estremamente importante per la storia della semiotica, ma anche per il presente della semiotica. Come sanno i dottorandi, ma come sanno anche gli studenti della laurea magistrale, è il luogo dove Lockman ha fondato la scuola e dove gli allievi Lockman continuano a utilizzare la semiotica per studiare le culture contemporanee. Mi piace che questi due interventi di MARI-LIIS, MADISSON e ANDREAS VENTSEL arrivino a conclusione del nostro seminario, perché si tratta di due veri e propri specialisti che hanno già pubblicato molto sulla semiotica del complotto, sulla semiotica della teoria delle cospirazioni. MARI-LIIS in particolare ha pubblicato un articolo in Semiotica, che è una rivista più importante del nostro settore, su questo argomento, che è diventato un po' un punto di riferimento teorico, e Andreas Ventzel si occupa da molti anni della diffusione nella sinosfera, soprattutto nel web, delle ideologie di estrema destra. Quindi, siccome abbiamo due interventi oggi, che dureranno solo 45 minuti, poi saranno seguiti da una breve discussione, vi propongo come sempre di accogliere con un po' introduction in Italian for your presentation. I already introduced your university, of course, which doesn't need an introduction, but also your important work on the theory of conspiracy theories and the semiotic reading of it. So,
thank you very much, Massimo. I am very glad to be here in lovely Torino, because I was writing my master's thesis here. Very process of forming my ideas was taking place in Torino, and I was here 3 years ago. And yeah, I'm really grateful for Massimo for this invitation. And now I'm going to start my presentation. I really hope that you don't mind if I'm reading it from the paper a bit, because I'm not a native speaker. And here we go. One more thing that I wanted to say is that I'm a third-year PhD student, and I plan to write an article about this NGO conspiracy theories, and I'm really grateful of all kind of comments or suggestions or questions, and I'm sharing my email address in the beginning of my presentation, but already also in the end. So I would really appreciate all kind of recommendations and things like that. So a few words about introduction, about why it is important to study online communication of extreme right. As I didn't say, my PhD thesis is about online communication of Estonian extreme right, and the conspiracy theory is really important role in that communication. I have reached a fact to conspiracy theory by my own topic as well. So many researchers have outlined that online environment is a key to survival of extreme right ideas in post-war era. And we know that in this liberal democratic worldview that is dominating in West, the protection of rights of minorities and yeah, all kinds of these egalitarian ideas have kind of become social cultural norms, and many authors have quoted that. And International Extreme Rights Network, it has become possible. This network has become possible mainly because English has developed into international language, and the extreme right authors are very eager to share links to the ideas of like-minded thinkers. And online communities based on similar worldview can operate as polarization machines because they help to confirm and thus to amplify undecided views. And the general problem is that the internet enables people to design their personal communication packages, which include predominantly the topics and opinions that they like, and they tend to exclude some troublesome issues and their voices. And generally, we can say that the extreme right online communities do not have an ambition to develop into a revolutionary mass movement, which will have a goal to systematically undermine the ruling structures. But still, the significance of those marginal and often polarized vernacular communities should not be underestimated, I think, because they may provide an impetus for some lone wolf-like prey. I think he's the clearest and latest example. And according to Roger Griffin, who is a British theorist of extreme right and he's also a historian, he says that extreme right online networks may offer ready-made solutions and narrative frames for particular individuals, and now I quote, who are in search of grand narratives and total truths, by transforming their ill-defined resentments and hatreds into a personal sense of higher mission to do something about it. And in my opinion, one central frame that dominates on this extreme right grassroots communities and internet is the New World Order conspiracy theory. And now a few words about my own situation in this particular presentation for the article. And yeah, I have to say that the aim of this study is to explicate the logic of this New World Order interpretation from the point of view of cultural semiotics. And I think it is important to note that this approach does not have a purpose to resolve the existence of particular conspiracy, and nor does it want to judge about the adequacy and the validity of particular interpretations of social reality. In many times when I'm explaining people that I'm studying conspiracy theories, they are becoming really excited and saying, oh, do you know this interpretation, do you believe it, do you think it's real? And of course I have opinions about that, and I do believe that in history some Greek conspiracies have existed, but the mechanism of producing conspiracy theories is kind of redundant in its creation of those associations. So sometimes conspiracies do exist, many times they don't, but I'm not the one who is going to judge about that particular issue. And I believe that the perspective of cultural semiotics does not imply appraising conspiracy theory as beneficial or harmful cultural phenomenon, and it rather sees it as a specific organization of information. As we know that from the thesis of cultural semiotics, we can define culture as a sphere of organization of information in human society, and it is opposed to disorganization or entropy. And the object of cultural semiotics is the functional correlation of different science systems, and the goal of its studies could be the explanation of how different science systems are working together, and how they are modeling reality and how do they co-function. And it is important to stress that, as Mikhail Lotman has said, it is important to stress that cultural semiotics is not interested in the reality of its in its entire diversity, but rather in science-based models of its reality, and in most cases, those science-based models seem to be simplified. And the study is focusing on semiotic mechanisms which function as a basis for constructing the explanatory model of brain, which is widespread in extreme right networks. And this frame depicts the systemic eradication program of allowing case of nation states of traditional family etc. And I outline the most central neo-interpretational frames that are proliferating in online network of Estonian extreme right. And those frames are noteworthy because of their ability to connect seemingly incompatible tendencies or even like controversial discourses and signifiers into a single synthetic explanation. And I also try to explain at first sight this paradoxical tendency, and that in vernacular online communities, where the text creation is significantly influenced by interactivity and hypertextuality, there still seem to dominate coherent and rigid tendencies of interpretation. At least in Estonian extreme communication, I can clearly detect that. So now some words about conspiracy theory as a frame of extreme right meaning creation. This brilliant Italian theoretician Umberto Eco has argued that the extreme right worldview is based on an obsessive idea of international conspiracy. Extreme rightists think that they are surrounded by hostile forces, but they are also worried about the expansion of those forces in inner structures. And conspiracy theory, in my opinion, is a really handy tool, a rhetorical tool for rationalizing extreme right worldview for its believers, but also for other people. I think that conspiracy theory gives extreme rightists a chance to translate the feeling of intolerance, fear, anger, moral superiority that sometimes exists in the level of just some essential conviction, which has more, in semiotical terms, this continuous or non-discrete nature, into more tangible, discrete language that is transferable to others as well. And conspiracy theories articulated by extreme right usually fit under the notion of New World Order, and many authors have noticed that tendency too. I'm not the first one. But to put it very brief, New World Order conspiracy theory talks about dreadful acts of a malicious covert group, which is usually believed to be absorbed into global economic and political elite. And its goal is to create a global centralized regime that is often thought to be this New World Order government, or totalitarian one-world government. And extreme right interpreters see that this conspiracy is undermining and ridiculing their sacred and solid identity markers, like race, national belonging, morality, that is often this Orthodox Christian morality, and traditional family and gender roles. And they think that it is a key factor of the success of this conspiracy, that undermining those values can promote the success of this conspiracy. And it is believed that that kind of sabotage will transform people into a nebulous global mass, which has mixed bloodline, that is not, they are not able to think independently and fight against the totalitarian system. And the extreme right interpreters see the final goal of this New World Order conspiracy in this Orwellian world scenario, where conspirators have achieved a full control over the movements, health, and even thoughts of people. And New World Order conspiracy theories have extremely syncretic nature. They tend to mix fragments of Illuminati, Zionist, and Masonic plots. And in terms of conspiracy theory studies, this New World Order conspiracy is a super conspiracy that models far-reaching pyramid structure of evil, and it is believed that it has affected the course of history for a long time. Like in some interpretations that go really, really far, think that it has affected the whole course of the history. And in this illustration, you can see that like really, really pyramid is quite vaguely articulated. For example, in this Estonian history right blogosphere, the most powerful manipulators are often referred just as controllers or masters, and no more specific details are added. But in other studies, it is also noticed that this conspiracy hierarchy is understood as a very powerful and almost supernatural dark forces. And in some cases, this tertiary group pulling the strings is also named. It has been said quite often that it is this Zionist occupation government, which is this classical enemy from extreme right terminology, and also this Arabian Illuminati, and the secret society, at least in Estonian interpretation, it is often connected with this cult of Lucifer. So quite supernatural and powerful. And the second layer of this conspiracy pyramid of this embryo, which is the henchman of Sigrid Cable, is much more discreetly articulated, and extreme right interpreters tend to think that the most influential structures of global political and economic elite are closely related to conspiracy. And Estonian extreme right thinkers seem to think that structures that have less power in global scale, for example, the Estonian government, they are also a part of this global conspiracy system, but the agents of Estonian state institutions, for example, are often understood as being maybe a bit not so important or not so aware of its corruptive agenda. And the main structures being accused of being henchmen of conspirators are, of course, international organizations. Of course, United Nations, the World Trade Organization, NATO, European Union, especially European Commission, IMF, Trilateral Commission, Bilderberg Group, the Club of Rome. They are the main agents that seem to recur in this conspirative interpretations. And other important areas strictly manipulated by the secret cable are understood the institutions that are related to mass media, with the education and with healthcare, and those layers also in Estonian extreme right interpretations, they seem to constantly come out. They are often referring that mass media is really deviated and really manipulated by these brainwashing mechanisms of this new world order. And the lowest and the widest layer, of course, of this conspirative pyramid is occupied by a mass of ignorant so-called ordinary citizens who are unwittingly under the influence of the NGO system and who are thus alienated from their independent thinking and moral principles. And extreme right interpreters spreading the New World Order theories see themselves also as victims of this totalitarian global order, but they also see themselves like morally superior than the masses, because they can see through the complex manipulations of the corrupted system, and they are constantly working to disclose this conspiracy and to make the others to open their eyes. And now a few words about the conspiracy theory in online communication of Estonian history right. It is actually the longest section of this presentation. But yeah, in following, I outlined the most common MBO representations of Estonian extreme right network, and I also tried to explain these conspiracy theories that have adapted with the peculiarities of online media and how it is functioning semiotically. And this possibility of hyperlinking matches remarkably well with this inclination of conspiracy theories to create all kinds of associations between seemingly separate events, agents, and phenomena. And Robert Glenn Howard has pointed out that when interpreters often visit specific sites that are connected by shared interests or values, they create vernacular webs. And frequent communication in those vernacular webs increases the perception of continuities and consistencies, and it thus increases vernacular authority, which is perceived valuable because it's non-institutional and so-called this participatory status. And in this vernacular way of skeptical knowledge, there emerges a permutation of so-called typical elements and key topics of conspiracy explanations, which are syncretically combined when suspicious events occur, and the parameters of considering some events suspicious can be really, really loose. So Turin, my non-participatory observation in Estonian extreme right vernacular way, which in my opinion consists of blogs, social media groups, homepages, and forums, are identified free, and of course it is a raw generalization or brutal generalization, but still I kind of identified three dominant topics of this New World Order conspiracy theory that seem to recur in different representations. And the first topic is that is a conviction that 9/11, post-mortem bombing, the Great Repression, and as well as many other globally or locally significant accidents, catastrophes, or crises were seen as an inside job of malicious global elite. And the main aim of those events was understood as legitimizing strict control methods, like, for example, in Estonia, the resonance was caused by this mass surveillance program PRISM, or all those feedback of the Snowden affair, that endangered the inviolability of private life, and also to causing mentality of fear and disorder of ordinary people that retards rational decision making. And the other aim of causing such events by conspirators was connected with the idea that it allows conspirators to occupy wealth of citizens, that the state and banks are thus making them financially weaker and more manipulable. And the second frame, or like interpretational flow that I detected, was that global warming was seen as this deceitful media propaganda, and actually the climate was understood to be cooling down, and the main goal of this malicious misconception was that the conspirators were aiming to make people to pay rapacious carbon dioxide taxes, and so the global divide can achieve more control of the resources of ordinary people. And the third one, that is my favorite, that is mixing so many different discourses that are probably close to my heart, was that the ideologies deviant from the point of view of radical nationalism, for example, feminism, multiculturalism, egalitarianism, they were understood to be elaborated by this New World Order system, and it was believed that, for example, feminism makes women to repudiate their natural needs and manners, and global elite is spitefully propagating it foreboding the decadence of traditional and moral way of living. And it includes the acceptance of sexual minorities and gender minorities, of course, as well. This family nihilism and a general inclination towards relativism and toleration of everything. And it was pointed out that the Frankfurt School, which is also known as the School of Cultural Marxists in extreme right vernacular words, has made a significant contribution for spreading such degenerate ideas. And now I quote one extreme right blog. It was said that cultural Marxists are trying to control the society by manipulating with language, media, and educational system, and they are achieving their goals by using censoring techniques known as political correctness, and the decreasing number of white children and the maximization of this tax slavery are seen as the main goal of those deviant ideologies like the feminism and cultural Marxism. And yes, previously outlined subtopics, I believe that they illustrate quite colorfully that new adult plots succeed in uniting seemingly incongruous discourses, like as we saw, the discourse of law, identity, education, gender, economy, security, ideology, and etc. And of course, like really different signifiers like private school, educational system, carbon dioxide taxes, etc. And additionally, I think it is important to point out that in the reading generation, extreme right waves are using hyperlinks, which also allow connecting various kinds of text fragmentation. For example, hypertextual code may incorporate verbal, visual, acoustic, intersemitic elements, as we all know. And Estonian vernacular waves of extreme rights aggregate larger number of hyperlinks, which combine various semiotic modes and multiple informational sources. Just some brief examples. They are presented scanned historical documents, articles, photographs, agreements from museum archives, some essays, book fragments, and all other kind of textual material, but also this white-powered music and adaptations of old German soldier songs that are still really popular in Estonia, and also various radio shows, many pictorial information which ranges from scanned wall photographs to mimetic reaction photoshops and range comics, etc., which are used for example, illustrating daily politics and maybe ridiculing their political opponents. And yes, they're as well using those audiovisual representations, mostly by links to YouTube, videos of oil music, or film lectures of some conspiracy gurus like Alex Jones or David Icke. And yes, sometimes those materials are also translated to Estonian readers who don't know English, and there are short summaries made as well. And this heterogeneous nature of extreme right hypertext creation is, besides using of different semiotic modes, also illustrated by the fact that they really tend to combine material from fundamentally different informational spheres. And this aspect is supported by this above-mentioned listing. They combine text from museum archives and maybe some magnetic videos. And several studies have outlined that this text processing opportunities of hypermedia, for example, this convenient replicability, transformability, and the possibility to easily adapt texts or text fragments into new associations, facilitates the curricular authorship. That texts are greatly constructed of material that previously exists on web. And in extreme right online representations, we can often see content from institutional sphere, for example, from the sites of public institutions, they quote our government's official web pages or official web pages of some parties that they usually seem to dislike. But also, yeah, from newspaper articles, from academic publications, even our humble article about the Estonian extreme right has been quoted in several times in those blogs. They know our work too. Yes. But also from less institutional sphere, they often quote Wikipedia articles. They have their own Wikipedia-like system, like extreme right Wikipedia, Metapedia of Estonian extreme right. They quote folklore articles, forum commentaries, and postings from different social networking sites. And yes, they also combine ideas from artistic texts, from commodity texts, like from some laws or some instructions, but also from this individual and collective creation. And it is noteworthy that extreme right authors do not often explicate how the particular links or text fragments are connected with the general message of his or her postings. And it is not only a problem for me as a researcher, but also some model interpreters of this extreme right network in those interactive commentariums. They seem to ask that why did you quote this particular article? Why did you say it? How it is important in the context of your general message? And things like that. It is not often explicated. And yes, thus the informational sphere, including postings which discuss different aspects of this New World Order conspiracy, does not often constitute a coherent textual system like this web-like communicational sphere. And several researchers of hypertext have argued that the way how a particular interpreter navigates in web-like textual complex can be paralleled with the way how a reader approaches to encyclopedia or database. And of course, this claim is contested as well, but it is still quite widespread in some interpretation. And the grand old man of hypermedia studies, Leone, has even claimed that it would be useful to understand the database as a primary symbolic form of the area of computer-mediated communication. And the form of database functions as a list of some objects, and different fragments of that list are not regulated by some in linear logic or centralizing organization principle. And those considerations lead me to ask how it is possible that in a maze of this information, which does not have a clear structure and which aggregates various kinds of discourses and ways of modeling together, those extreme right interpreters still reach to coherent and sometimes, like in the level of a researcher who is familiar with those representations, we can say even redundant or predictable cluster of interpretations, which connects the cause of all kinds of events and phenomena with the idea of a malignant New World Order conspiracy. And in the following section, I tried to explain the logic of developing these New World Order interpretations by relying on MARI-LIIS work of hypermedia narrative and the concept of context by Altman. And now some words about semiotic logic of constructing New World Order interpretation. MARI-LIIS points out that usually interpreters of hypertext imply that the textual network is a set of information where to look for certain things, but not a constituent story world where to immerse. And the vast majority of the interpreters will approach hypertextual system as some kind of information jigsaw puzzle. And interpreters try to put the whole picture together of the text fragments that they reach in quite random order. They try to match every fragment with a general narrative pattern that is gradually developing in their mind. And one can make pauses while putting pieces of jigsaw puzzle together. So the same logic applies also in the case of interpreting hypertextual text corpuses. The interpreter can construct a general mental whole in many steps which constantly improve his or her initial vision. And Ryan also stresses that approaching hypertextual informational maze as some coherent narrative is likely when the interpreter somewhat already is familiar with the general plot. And in that case, the moving in this informational database or maze, it functions like putting a magnifying glass in certain aspects of the story, and new information is just added to the familiar plot as complementation of some of its nuances, or it is dismissed as insignificant. And if to bring it back from our example of those New World Order conspiracy theories that are developing in this extreme right vernacular way, we can say that, for example, some particular text fragments may specifically concentrate on details on the nature of some conspiratorial expert groups. For example, conspirators who are specialized in manipulating the media, affecting the educational system, undermining some particular nation state, or coordinating the work of different international organizations, or organizing the specific events like this financial crisis that took place in 2009. And at the same time, some other fragment may confirm the conviction that the conspirators have this inhuman evil nature. There was one posting in one blog that I recently read. It was from March, and it was said that the cancer, the autism, the retardation, and the Alzheimer and Parkinson's disease are caused by the conscious actions of conspirators. And there was also named that Bilderberg, the Council of Foreign Relations, and the Trilateral Committee and the Club of Rome were responsible of poisoning vaccines and contaminating the food in order to weaken the white race. And this particular author of this posting was expressive the evil nature of those conspirators. And some interpreter may consider all those postings of a certain web page significant, but he or she also may not. She may or he may dismiss them as biased, as inessential, as controversial, etc. But representations that seem significant to a particular interpreter, for example, which confirm his or her previous suspicion or add some new nuances, find their place in his or her general vision of this conspiracy. And the interpretation of hypertextual maze as subplots of this New World Order conspiracy theory becomes possible because of some interpretational frames that already exist in his or her conceptual horizon. They become somehow highlighted and presented content. For example, the phrase of NGO, those like core events like 9/11 or financial crisis, or some key characters that seem to be repeated in those interpretations, like NATO or WTO or our president Thomas Kennedy Kilvers, who is always seen as a part of this conspirative system, and it is somehow ironic because in Estonia, president has only this representative function, and he doesn't actually have much power, but he's always seen as a part of this conspirative network. And those like code signals activate a code text that is characterized by extremely adaptive causal structure of this code text, and it enables to connect seemingly coherent elements. And according to Lautmann, a code text is a textual system that originates from cultural memory of a particular collective, and about the code text, Lautmann has only written in one article, like thoroughly, at least in only one article, that it's the text inside text. It is fortunately translated also into English. And he says that a code text is a certain kind of interlink that, instead of being an abstract collection of rules for constructing the text, each textual system with rigid syntactic order, and the different signs of code text can be divided into various substructures, but despite this, the code text remains unambiguous for the level of itself. And for its own level, the code text is a unitary phenomenon in both in content and in expression. And code text unites into a unitary text elements with which, for so-called outsider perspective, would remain unconnected. And for a bystander, the code text may appear as a diffuse aggregate, but for those for whom the code text functions as the text of collective memory, it becomes an essential landmark for interpreting multiple different events. And I believe, and as I already stated in my article that was published in Semiotica, the frame of conspiracy theory can be treated as an important code text of the extreme right informational space, and the text of this code text, or the message of this code text, is that here it means that in the case of some particular event that is often perceived as unpleasant, dangerous, or in some other ways suspicious, there is something to do with conspiracy. That means it has some relations with this malignant plan of the covert embryo grouping. And the code text of conspiracy theory allows to connect events which have happened in various times and in various places, and it allows involving different actors that are seen totally incompatible for bystanders. As we saw before, there were so many signifiers put together, and representations of this embryo super-conspiracy enable to avoid all kind of ambivalence and randomness. Every detail and event, and it can be this natural disaster, social conflict, disease, etc., is presented as an elaborated plan of the system of this global conspiracy. And according to Marina Krishakova, who is also a Estonian theoretician, it is pointed out that events that can be based on events can be understood according to various types of causality. There are many kinds, but natural causality, which is characterized by explicating logical and physical relations, and causality reduced to intentionality, are the two most clearly distinguishable types. And the causality based on intentionality is usually very complex, and in many types of communication we cannot see very clear types of it. But I believe that yes, in conspiracy theories we can usually this causality based on intentionality is quite vague, and it is hard to decide what is actually responsible for causing particular change, like what kind of human intentions or what kind of motivations they seem to appear in entangled complex. But in conspiracy theories, those representations tend to present intentions of conspirators in a very homogeneous and clear-cut way. And many causes of events are reduced to the evil nature of the evil interests of the conspirators. And the conviction of the evil intentions of conspirators functions as an effective organizing principle, and it is perceived as a factor which has motivated the course of whole history. And it doesn't mean that conspiracy theories are neglecting the natural causality. No, it is quite the opposite. The dimension which explains how a particular event happened in specific physical or social or historical conditions is sometimes depicted in an incredible detailed way. But the reason why conspirators are perceived extremely dangerous and omnipotent is that interpreters presume that they have capacities of applying this natural causality for the service of their evil intentions. And they do it in so sophisticated way that most people will never notice that. Thus, this neo-conspiracy theory acknowledges the diversity of various phenomena and relations, but at the same time it assumes that different events are motivated by evil as the ultimate all-embracing cause. And as different dimensions of reality are perceived as parts of the same system of evil, then the attributes essential for distinguishing such structures return vague. And I have explained this vagueness of reference in conspiracy theories in more detailed way in my application in semiotica. And I think it is important to note that the resemblance between different descriptive connections, like different antagonists, different places where events are taking place, and etc. And is blurring the reference, and it is encoded in the very nature of this context of conspiracy itself. By trying to map a heterogeneous spectrum of events, it is inevitable that differences between elements begin to lose their qualitative differences, and yes, that they are understood as a result of their underlying totalizing communality. And at the end, some words about the deepening significance of conspiracy. And yes, Lotman has outlined that the text is functionally used as a code rather than a message when it does not add new knowledge, but it translates already existing message into a new system of meanings. And it is, I believe it is particularly the case of code text. And it means that the process of auto-communication is taking place. And in the case of code text, we have to distinguish two levels. At first, the level of natural language, and the second, that code text has in the level of this culture text. And of course, in the level of natural language, code text has its semantics, but in the level of culture text, it does not include new information, and it rather functions as predominantly syntagmatic or semantic code. And conspiracy theories share an invariant system of relations which originates from the cultural memory, and many authors can vouch for that. And in concrete interpretations, the invariant frame is filled with particular content, but if you consider it from this analytical level, we can see that different NGO interpretations, in those interpretations, the interpreter is re-experiencing the same initial frame that he or she already previously knows. And then if the interpreter feels something obscure, suspicious, unpleasant, immoral about some particular phenomena, and the context of conspiracy is like, which is in his or her interpretative horizon is activated, then it becomes a possible frame according to which the experience can be modeled and related to structure of cultural memory. And when the supplementary code is added, and the message of this, which was perceived in so-called language of this everyday experience, when they start to interact with the supplementary code, then the secondary semantics will appear above them. And it is formed of the shifts of retransformation which will happen in the light of this supplementary code. And part of it is the code of Lotman. Conspiracy theory functions as a trigger of cultural auto-communication, which is a supplementary code which converts this interpreter's everyday experience into fixed structural units, which gives features to a new and a more meaningful message. And the interpreter will relate his or her instant experience with elements of this code text. And Ben Lepik, who is also an unfamous member of Tartu Moscow School, has stated that the specific structural characteristic of code text is authoritative sphere of reference, which objects locate in axiologically higher sphere than everyday meanings or everyday experiences. And I believe that that one important aspect of this recurring new order frame is not only that the events that are received as a result of conspiracy theory become more meaningful, but also that the conspiracy itself will turn more confirmed and significant because of those frequent interpretations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this brilliant presentation. So we're going to have the second presentation now, and we're going to take all the questions at the end of the two presentations are
I also came from Tartu University. My main research topics related with political semiotics. My PhD thesis were about semiotic approach to the concept of hegemony, where I tried to synthesize cultural semiotics by Tartu Moscow School and the concept of hegemony by Ernesto Laflau and Antonio Ramsey. And my nowadays interest more related with political aspect and political communication, online communication. And I have to apologize that maybe some of ideas overlap with MARI-LIIS presentation.
Because he was my supervisor.
Yeah. This is Auto-Communications, keeping more and more ideas. And of course, because of that maybe too much allotment will get together.
Yeah.
But hopefully it's not a problem. So, I begin. Problems which is in global situation. Aim of my presentation, sorry, if I speak very slowly or I don't know, you will always interrupt me and ask something. It's not a problem. Aim of presentation is to show how the integration and its characteristics related to conspiracy theories function in the intermedia and how we can this process explain as political activity. As argued by Lister and other cyber theorists, digital wars of information, storage, access, and manipulation have led to the major changes in the way information is produced, warned, achieved, and used. The main transformation of the possibilities of migration is caused by non-radical organization of hypermedia text. And these texts usually are very moved towards reality and temporariness. And if you compare it with old media, hypermedia asks question the fundamental importance of linear text creation and promote the way and change the way of collective authorship. And we may see that the resulting structure of hypermedia refer to endless potentialities of migration of the World Wide Web as an enormous holistic system. But still, if we try to see it in case of conspiracy theory, there arise some kind of important communicational nodes or centers which help to transform and form signification as such. When I go further, I try to do some general remarks. How I can see politics and political. I think about political here in more broader sense. It's not about only politics in arena-based activity, but political means, and I derive from this idea from Carl Schmitt and more recursive understanding of political and politics, where political mean the permanent antagonism in society, and politics is something which try to pound or cover this kind of antagonism. In this sense, not all activity of politics actually related with political institution like parliament or so on. We can think about a little bit larger. And the other important aspect that I don't want to make any decisions about rationality and adequacy of conspiracy theory. First, it's caused by this simple understanding that political itself, including democratic politics, not based on rationality, and for me it's political more connected with how we can create social communities. It's also social identities. Because my ontological background that I'm trying to use here is related with understanding of this course, which I derive from Laclau and Wolff understanding, which also related with the Pauline tradition, and so on, where this course is understood as or objectivity is understood only in the level of discourse. What it means? It means basically this all social object, culture, economics, politics is constructed and constituted on the level of discourse. It doesn't mean that discourse create, I don't know, physical things. No, only through discourse of meaning we can get what we mean about this kind of phenomena as politics or economy and so on. So our relation also in this sense can be connected only with the level of discourse. And I try to use exploring my idea that how conspiracy theories can be in online communication explained as political activity. We use for this explanation dominant concept of dominant by Roman Massimo. and Fatigue Function of Language, also by Roman Jakobson, and Auto-Communication by Yuri Botman. So, let's begin with some definition. MARI-LIIS already did this, but okay. A conspiracy theory has been defined as explanation of an unpleasant event as being the result of conspiracy. I don't read from PowerPoint anymore because you can read yourself, but I just add here that the adaptive system of relation of conspiracy theory allows to express an every nature of secret catalog, but its specific parts, for example, the articulation of different subsystems of conspirators, temporal and spatial relation of particular event, logical and causal connection with other events, etc., may comprise various structures with different levels of discreteness. Conspiracy theory do not normally depict events as a result of unhappy coincidence or tragic accidents. They rather see that this kind of events, unhappy events, are motivated by an ultimate cause, morally corrupted intentions of current group of conspirations. Another very important here, that conspiracy theory usually do not only explain why awful things happen, but usually they also explain or try to explain how those events happened. And of course this kind of explanation, level of explanation varies in different interpretations. And now I try to conceptualize this kind of conspiracy theory in framework of cultural semiotics. And doing this, we may say that conspiracy theory can be explained as specific mechanism of manipulation, a semiotic unit, which basic feature is boundless. Non-semiotic phenomena or text of other semiotic systems become actual to a semiotic, this particular semiotic unity only if they are translated into a language of this unit. And of course, this kind of translation varies, and this is one of the main aim in cultural semiotics in Tartu Moscow School, to find this kind of different kind of translations and explore different kind of cultural phenomena using concept of translation. And we may see that this kind of semiotic sphere can come to contact with extra-semiotic sphere. Extra-semiotic means here also text from other semiotic sphere, not something which out of any semiotics. And the later works, Roman itself don't use anymore this separation of culture and non-culture, because there are no such things as non-culture, because all this is just other culture. But still, it's some kind of analytical differentiation. And this kind of bilingual mechanism of order which has measures to inclusion of information, filters the outside information and sets off the mechanism of reprocessing the outside information into the inside. Sorry if I use here as synonyms semester, text, culture, because Lotman itself used in different ways. And I have written about it in one article, and the Prof also have explained. There are some little differentiations, but not no. So, in this sense, conspiracy theory draws together different informational spaces that vary in the sense of informational space, but also in the sense of activity. In that kind of communication, semiotics unity will rise on the level of self-description and will start to contrast itself with other so-called outer squares. Because only doing this, this semiotic unity can recognize itself as some kind of particular. And I tried to explain this kind of process and this kind of arising of semiotic unity now with concept of ANDREAS and Torino. We already mentioned about, according to MacLeod, any social formation of any formation of social identities necessarily involves inclusion and exclusion. And associated discursive contestation where discourse is understood as a contingent and partialization of meaning is the case of politics, that constitutes an organized social relation, including identities, objects, and practices. The communication of conspiracy theorists is characterized by strongly polarized identification, and it's organized by important dominant. The opposition, radical opposition of us and them, the other, even enemy, when we talk about partially and what is the function of this kind of dominant? According to Jakobson, as we can read from this slide, the dominant may be defined as a focusing component of text. It rules, determines, and transforms the remaining components, which include the same principle of semiotic. It is the dominant which guarantees the integrity of the structure. And according to Lotman, self-descriptions usually elicit the dominance and builds as a unified model which will become a code of self-cognition of particular semiotic code. Of course, this kind of articulation identity may vary. How this kind of opposition is very radical, not so radical to vary, but still this kind of characteristic opposition between us and them is typical of all kinds of conspiracy theories. Informational field conspiracy theories usually share a conviction that the vast majority of contemporary social process is the immediate result of malicious conspiracy. It is assumed that the world is subjugated by a greedy and morally corrupted elite, acting in secret, and whose ultimate goal is to establish its global authoritarian regime. Different type of MARI-LIIS showed different kind of cultural phenomenon, globalizing, economic, community, cultural harmonization, so on, massive immigration, as seen as a signs of this kind of success of conspiracy. And what is important here, I also you will talk about very little. But what is important here, this kind of conspiracy theorists do not only limit themselves by expressing the decadence of contemporary work, but they also try to find the way out of this kind of decadence, try to radically reform this kind of work. Of course, not all. Some of conspiracy theorists are not too active, so to speak, to make a revolution, but still, they also try to find a way out. So, usually, like I already written here, this kind of conspiracy theory is usually referred as the new world order, which combine classical plots and analysis of conspiracy theories, Freemasons, political elite, Jews, Catholics, aliens, blah blah blah, etc. And you may see that accessibility and easy spreadability of hypertextual sources will have a diversified that spectrum significantly. I refer here to Turin and Venttsel written about this some years ago. This kind of new world order conspiracy theory constitutes a frame narrative that is including almost all ideas that are present in the cultural field of knowledge of fringe politics. And this kind of information makes the believers of conspiracy theories see causal relation between events that have taken place in different time and space and that normally seem completely separate from outside. So, we may say, at least from my opinion, that this kind of unity which built up by conspiracy theory is quite similar to this concept of political unity or political community, which was elaborated by Carl Schmitt in this famous work on the concept of political. This kind of community, Gemeinschaft, it is built on the actual possibility of grouping all significant agents as a friend and enemies. And this kind of unity determines itself who is the enemy against who to fight. And we will say that, and we can see that in conspiracy theories articulate heterogeneous elements by their connection with every structure, they all understood as something that needs to be disclosed. So, some agents, social structures are demonized as evil, as totally antithetic enemy of us. And usually they do not share any common ground with conspirators. And what is important here, it's important to note that this kind of educational practice, which takes place through this course, it's not articulate something regular identities. In this sense, absolute evil needs to have always one and different reference. But through articulation of this course, this kind of understanding of evil is created because this kind of articulation, who is the evil, who is the agent of evil, depends on such a political situation. The level of self-description of conspiracy theorists implies a corrupted society. Of the decadence of harmonic society is explained by malicious and systematic acts of conspirators. The reason of the projection of a harmonic society can explain, at least from my point of view, by the sometimes unconscious perception of threats of the revolution of information and communication technology. Human has indicated that new things, artifacts that originate from outside the tradition have increased symbolism. It can be said that the semiotics of things generates the mythology of things. They are interpreted as a sign of disaster and prosperity. It means, and I refer here in Heilotman, son of collective fear is not a direct reaction to a particular trait. It is rather recognition of signs of potential danger. And we may say that this kind of sign, for example, information, overview, diversity of different kinds of interpretational process, as well as technological complex nature of pyramid itself, have led to an increasing fragmentation of society, at least from the point of view of conspiracy theories. For conspiracy theorists, the antagonistic figure of conspirator signifies a sharp cut between ideological representation of harmonic society and actual experience of society, which cannot be grasped with his her cognitive brains in order to raise in other ways. This kind of agents from outside, in our case conspirators, enables conspiracy theorists to explain social conflicts and deviations from ideal communal life, and is thus needed for creating a meaningful, coherent world, which somehow escaped because of aforementioned reasons. So, but of course, this was only one dominant, which, at least from my point of view, is not enough for explain this communication process in political sense. And now I'll try to explain it with concept of auto-communication and function of language. Usually theorists of conspiracy theories are not characterized by an ambition of dialogue or synthesis, but rather the concentration and fixation of already existing views. So, we may say that they tend to navigate in quite hermetic informational space. You will not distinguish two types of communication, I, and I, she, he. Of course, in a real communication situation, they always exist in the same type, but we can make some kind of typology of culture where one communicational type is more prevailing or some culture towards more, for example, I, she communication model. And what is important that auto-communication may be observed mostly in the cases where the addressee receiver of the message is a larger community, nation, or our case, community of conspiratorial theories. What's the main characteristic of II communication model? In the system of II, the carrier of the information, in our case, I already told, communication between conspiracy theorists remains the same, but the message itself is formulated and it gains a new meaning. And this kind of process, as already MARI-LIIS explained, can happen because the other codes add. A message, it means a message in natural language is introduced, formed by supplementary code, which is plural formal organization. And tension arises between the original message and the secondary code. And the effect of this tension is the tendency to interpret the semantic elements of the text as if they were included in the supplementary systematic construction. And that's why this kind of information acquire new relationary meanings from this interaction. If you try to compare I-she communication, then I-she or I-he communication usually take place as I just tell something to the other. And but the message stayed the same, but what changed that now this kind of message by more people. This is basically analytical integration. And we see that, at least from my opinion, and I think from my opinion, that conspiracy theorists followed by or conducted by this kind of communication model, as I know, a constant process of meaning generation is taking place there, but its vocabulary is greater in a limited number of steps or stereotypes, and it does not allow an exchange of information. The selection of information organized by auto-communication implies that the system is open only for connection that are already well known to the receiver and receiver. New fragments of information are placed on an inner semiotic sphere of conspiracy theories, and it leads to a cultivation of already existing association. This is very important that this kind of process, the same message somehow deepening this kind of meaning that all bad things happens because of bad behavior. What's behind the word. So, and if we have in mind that the essence of personality may be taught as an individual set of socially significant codes, it was by Lotman, then the choice of code and the passages of interpretations of personality navigating of the field of conspiracy theories is guided by auto-communication. The elements are interpreted according to very limited numbers of samples. The science of international conspiracy has seen behind various local and global events. For example, thus the switch between legal code, for example, legal range of information legal in the internet, was also mentioned by MARI-LIIS, historical code, expressing worries about criminalizing Holocaust religions, philosophical ethical code, questioning a cultural acceptance of minorities, political code, and so on, will lead to qualitative deepening of the conviction that there exists powerful and global new world order conspiracy. Thus, we can say that in addition to provoking antagonistic as-member relation, the main creation of conspiracy theory has also orientation towards auto-communication. And now I will put this one last yeah. Okay. I try to do fast. As was previously indicated, usually the receiver already knows the content of the conspiracy theory, because there are no generally speaking, very much differ if the rear of conspirators is filled with minority groups, people with other skin color, Jews, Muslim, NATO, or big corporations. Thus, we can see that the semantic exchange, because they all refer to the big, bad end. Thus, we can see that the semantic exchange that takes place in this kind of communication is not very remarkable. But this is compensated by other important functions of communication. The promotion of a strong communal code. And here, one function of language elaborated firstly by Roman Jacobson come to say. And how Jacobson defined language function. Phonetic language function predominates, for example, in a communication that is based on the exchange of written formulas and which only aims to continuing the communication. It's directed to conduct a physical channel and psychological connection between the addressee and the adversary, enabling both of them to enter and stay in communication. Jacobson different six different functions of language, but they all function simultaneously. But we may also say that there are some communications where some of them more prevail. So, and other important things that even Jacobson deal mostly on linguistic function of language. He also emphasizes that this pragmatic approach to language must lead to an analogous study of the other similar system. It means that this kind of phonetic language can be also used describing communication within other semantic systems. For example, conspiracy theorists tend to exchange audio-visual message. For example, secret signs, word-number formulas, icon and picture in vital sense pieces of songs. Usually, this kind of pieces of information do not exhibit information and value because they already know by previous use of this kind of messages. But they are very important in the sense of maintaining the continuity. And I refer to what knowledge about data. This kind of silence, phonetic pause, or other small microsymbols indicate their recognition of one's interrupter as a potential communicative partner. In the primary, linguistic meaning becomes almost irrelevant. These expressions are rather used for fulfilling the social function. Social function can be understood as establishing an atmosphere that fosters private and public interaction between two communication partners. And I just try to elaborate more. This Jacobson model or phonetic function, and I refer here to knowledge and data again, that this phonetic communication have three functions. A social function to establish and maintain social connection, a communicative function to demonstrate that the channel of communication is open and present to oneself as a potential communication partner, and a validation and recognition function to indicate recognition of one intellectual as potential communicative partner. The phatic function also allows to provide lexical information for social categorization, to equate the relationship, in particular relative status, roles, and affectivity, to reinforce social structure. So, of course, I don't want to say that all cases where auto-communication and phatic function is dominated in the process of communication is political, but at least in my opinion, if there are at least 3 dominants exist at the same time, then we can say that this kind of communication also achieve some kind of political potential. And it means that there have to be all 3 dominants, antagonistic opposition between conspirators and conspiracy theorists, who try to reveal the converged action, manipulation that is oriented toward auto-communication, and the domination of phatic function, phatic communication that supports auto-communication and promotes the fascinating pattern to communal ties. As said by Rothman, this kind of auto-communicative systems produce a great mental activity because they recognize different appearances of the same phenomenon behind radically dissimilar occurrence. But on the other hand, this kind of auto-communicative system are not enough dynamic for meeting the needs of human society. And what is the purpose of this kind of paper documentation? At least I try to do it. This kind of analysis of quasi-political communities will allow us to map the characteristics of online communication and political communication in general. And we will ask what kind of rules of signification are prevailing in the process of forming discursive communities, also in online communities, online communication. How does the specifics of dominance influence signification strategies? If and how we can distinguish online and offline communication of the same community, and maybe this kind of approach would help us to explicate the communication and dynamics between different communities, but also to explain conflicts that are caused by the specifics of communication. Thank you very much.
Well, no, it was perfect. Thank you so much for these very thought-provoking presentations. They were very clear. We were able to follow everything, and I have, of course, several questions before I open the debate. I abuse my position of chair. The first question is addressed perhaps to both of you, and concerns the possibility of singling out some specific characteristics of conspiracy theories that come from this ideological tendency. So, are there characteristics of New World Order conspiracy theories that we would not find elsewhere? So this is the first question. The specificity of right-wing conspiracy theories in relation to, for instance, environmental or medical conspiracy theories, etc. And I would like to ask you another question, more specific, in relation to the papers you presented. To MARI-LIIS, I really appreciated the interpretation that you gave of And I was wondering whether conspiracy theories from this point of view replace the role that some religions and religious thoughts would have in society. The devil, for instance, was a very practical character because it could be referred to in order to explain all sorts of evils. So it was a very harmonizing agency in the way people would interpret their lives. And the second specific question is, I was very interested in your categorization of conspiracy theories as quasi-political thought. But I wonder whether your presentation is not very influenced by, well, of course it is, but I would like to discuss it, by the definition itself of political that you choose. Because Laclau that you choose as a source has a very antagonistic definition of politics. This British-Argentinian political thinker is, among other things, the inspirator of Kirchner's government. And you can see in Argentinian society that this is taken literally. So you are either with me or you are against me. But I wonder whether other definition of political can be considered, in which reaching a large consensus, the Angela Merkel model of politics instead of application of politics is central. In that case, conspiracy theories would be a sort of an anti-politics, in the sense that they don't try to reach this kind of large societal consensus, but on the contrary, they try to seclude some minorities from the majority or some minorities among themselves. So, but I leave the floor to you and maybe to other questions after questions.
Okay, thank you, Massimo, for the questions. At first, I'm going to address the first question about the specifics of this New World Order conspiracy theories of extreme right. And yes, we have to say that the conspiracy theory of this New World Order is so broad. It can basically be detected in many kind of online communities, also from the communities of this far left. Especially in Estonia, we're thinking about this comparative analysis, because yes, this anti-colonization movement and especially the vaccine topic as well is so ideologically loose. It can be connected with many communities, but in this Estonian extreme right community, they are popping out the key topics like this eradication of white race, the weakening of the nation states, the mixing bloodline that will cause, in the opinion of those extreme right interpreters, the weakening of general morality, and it is believed that people with those mixed identity markers are not able to think independently. And also this undermining of traditional values, of those gender values, and family values that are more characteristic to extreme right are connected to this plot. Yes.
So it's mostly a thematic specificity.
Yes.
More than
Yes.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, because as I already saw, you can already saw from my slide, ontological background Laclaudian, and it's also, of course, influenced how I think about and conceptualize politics. But what was important for me, that if we conceptualize politics based on antagonism, which allow us to see it more, political activity, not only in a very specific institutional level, That's why maybe this kind of understanding is needed more, because now in oral communication, this order, what is the institutional, official politics, what is not, is very blurred. That's why it's maybe try to or give us a chance to escape from this limitation if we think about politics only in the case of arena. That's not really. But of course, there are also can be think about possibility how we can think about political aspect in different way. For example, consensus-based communication, but I don't know if it's any more related with conspiracy theories.
Are there any other questions?
I have a materialistic question. If I understood well, you wrote that book maybe in 2013. I wonder if you know if I will find it available in the university library in here in Turin. The book of 2013, brought by both of you.
Oh, it was an article. Maybe I wrote it in 2013. Yeah, I think it was in 2013. Yes, it's Groupuscular Identification Informational Network of Estonian Far Right. And
we can maybe send Massimo the
Okay.
draft version. It is accepted in a journal, but it's not published yet. It's published in Estonian, but in English
It's now a beginning process. Trying to send it to this Buttons of Justice journal.
Yes.
Because,
We can share
the draft.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, but also address it to Massimo's other question
Yes, sure.
about this, our conspiracy theories maybe somehow replacing religion. I think this question is really important in Estonian context, because some research about Estonian religious field has showed in like 2 decades that Estonia is probably the least religious country in the European Union or in Europe. But it doesn't mean that Estonians are not spiritual, or that we are not believing in some supernatural forces. But yes, we try to make those syncretic combinations of basically everything. And I believe that yes, conspiracy theory is especially good tool for modeling this evil, to projecting it outside and to give it probably a bit like, maybe not higher, but in some ways, yes, we need more this supernatural explanation with this supernatural touch, explanation to tragic or unpleasant events that are happening to us.
Funny example about the spirituality of Estonians, this kind of exploration, which was done yet 2 years ago. There was one that soul of human people believe approximately 50%.
Yeah,
Soul of
percent
believe 60%. So
yes, we believe that
we believe
trees have
different
souls, but people, it is probably very highly dependent on how the questions are asked. Yes,
actually, spirituality not related with institution.
yeah.
Because it's because of historical roots, this German party German background and so on.
And also Soviet occupation.
Yeah.
We have time for like one more question.
In fact, I had a question each, so I tried to keep it short because I'm out of time. The first one was for MARI-LIIS. There is a website in Italian which is called something around Research Hub on New World Order. It's not scientific at all, in fact it's quite fun. And there was an article about Reiki, which is the practice of imposing hands to heal. And it was entitled Reiki, the secret weapon of Jesuits. And it was in fact a description of what Reiki is. And then they said, okay, we don't know how this is profitable for Jesuits, but we're sure it is. And so I was wondering when a conspiracy theory becomes so thick, so all-comprehensive, that you don't need anymore to understand the causality of something, but you can just assume that everything is just linked to that.
Yes.
And the second question for Andreas, in your very first slide, I think, or maybe the second. Not this one. No, the next one too. Yes. Here it speaks about the non-hierarchical organization of hypermedia texts. And well, as we all know, for Lockman, hierarchy is very important. And so I wanted to ask you if you can elaborate a little more, because I found it a very interesting statement. Thank you to both.
Thank you, Mattia, for the question. I think it is hard to answer it in only one way, and why conspiracy theories are sometimes producing so certain, but somehow so absurd or so partly provable statements. And I think that Umberto Eco, in his concept of this hermetic semiosis, has attached it in quite well manner. He says that yes, the parameter of association produced by conspiracy theories is kind of loosely created, but this conviction, this inner conviction that there is something behind it, there have to be relations between all different kind of events are so much in this interpretative horizon of conspiracy theories. But I don't believe that every time that they point out those connections, they actually believe that those connections are the right ones. Sometimes they're just joking, sometimes they're just fantasizing or trying to cause some funny feelings among its auditorium, but yes, sometimes they really believe it.
What was my point here? That usually very many bigger theorists try to explain this resonant structure of online communication through technological features of this hypermedia and online communication. But in case of development, if you think about online communication as some kind of meaning generation process, I think, at least as we try to explain in our this Corpuscular article, that there always arise some kind of nodal points. Because if we think about, not about anymore of technological level, but in the level of signature, as some kind of place where meaning generated or meaning arises, then of course this kind of process conducted by different kind of hierarchies and so on, because otherwise no communication is possible. Can arise. That's why there are different kind of aspects of semiotics can find these kind of hierarchies and structures of meaning generating process, and in conspiracy theory, of course, very surprising.
Okay, thank you again for this